All right, everyone. Welcome to session 4 of Youth Advocacy Training for Ocean and Climate Action. We are rounding out this training cycle with a good conversation today. I'm really excited. And as always, as we're waiting for more people to filter in and to join us for this fourth and final session of the regular training session, don't forget, we have special session 5 next week. I will talk about that at the end of this session. As we're waiting for more people to filter in, go ahead and let us know, what's your name? How old are you? Where are you from? And this week's icebreaker is, what does it mean to you to show up for your community? How can you show up for them? And how can they show up for you? So go ahead, answer that icebreaker in the chat. We'll get started in just a minute. Okay, so again, feel free to continue introducing yourselves in the chat. I know we've got folks from all over United States and across the world, and it's really good to see you all here. I see some familiar names that have been with us throughout the session. I see some brand new names. So if this is your first session, welcome. Feel free to catch up on the YouTube channel where sessions 1 through 3 are posted. This session will also be up, as will next session. So yeah, we're gonna run through our schedule here. We've got some folks sharing in the chat. Abigail from Massachusetts says, to show up for community means to be involved in community events and be around to support outreach or fundraisers. Such things might be walks for homeless or church fundraisers. They can show up for you by participating likewise. Definitely, yeah, that mutual engagement is really important. Cheyenne says, I think it means to be the voice and empower those around you. They can show up by engaging with you and your cause. Yep, again, that mutual back and forth. Very, very important. I think we'll talk a lot about that today. And David says, showing up for your community means to me helping events that help the community. Yeah, and I think that's a good way to start this conversation. Today we're going to take all of the things that we learned from session 1 through 3 through the Ocean Climate Connection, social media and communications, and event planning and fundraising. And we're going to take all of those skills and put them together today. So we're running through our introduction here. We'll have our little discussion, we'll have our Q&A, and then we'll talk a little bit more about the certificate of completion, which I know I've gotten some questions about, and we'll talk about that at the end. So now, introducing our wonderful speaker for this week, Grace Dolishall. She is working in Washington State. She does really, really wonderful work. She's very, very knowledgeable, and I'm super excited to have her on. We have worked with her through World Ocean Day a couple years ago, so it's great to have her back working with us. And yeah, I'll pass it over to Grace so you can introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Grace. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm in the Seattle area in Washington State. I've lived in Washington State for most of my life. I lived in Oregon for just a little bit when I was in college. But yeah, I've done a lot of work. I got involved in this work. Really, I'm kind of a lifelong organizer. My first organizing experience was organizing a school cleanup on my school playground in elementary school. But really got started in this work kind of organizing and engaging in community at a larger level when I was about 14 and had the pleasure of working with World Oceans Day in various capacities throughout the years, but more so when I was in high school. And so super excited to be back here today and be chatting with you all. I currently work at an organization called Washington Conservation Action. They're a part of the larger League of Conservation Voters movement in the United States. And I'm their civic engagement organizer. So I do a lot of campaign planning. I just wrapped up a pretty big campaign around election season. I'm now working in the legislative session on some legislative priorities. And really, I kind of describe myself as the bridge between government and community. So, how to bring people into the movement, get people connected to their elected officials, educate people about policies that are going on. And then on the other side, how to communicate community needs to elected officials and make sure that communities are represented in the policies that are going through the legislature. So, super happy to be here with all of you and talk with all of you. And thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to have you, Grace. And a little disclaimer, I do have a really rough cold right now, so if I go on mute and I'm coughing and hacking up a lung, just ignore that. But moving on to the discussion, Grace, as you mentioned, your work, driving that collective power for action, being that bridge, that takes a lot from a lot of different people with a lot of different skills. But when we talk about campaigns as a way to enact change, we kind of, the purpose behind them is to make sure this change is long lasting. So how can we actually, as young people, for the folks who are listening who have maybe possibly participated in a campaign or, have not, but have familiarity with what that means, base question. How does building collective power through these campaigns lead to more substantial and lasting change for the broader movement?
Yeah, I think that is it's a really big question. But the broader movement, right, for me is environmental justice and um, just making sure that people have a healthy, livable planet and ocean, and we're protecting life and all these things. And so, what campaigns do is they really hone in on that because that is such a big goal and such a broad goal, whether it's oceans, whether it's forests, whether it's climate. You need to have campaigns kind of ground you and anchor you in the work that's going on. And you have to approach the work little by little, issue by issue that is going on. So, um, for me, this past election season, I ran a campaign called Call for Climate Action. And what we were really focused on, because we knew that this was going to be a big election year where we really wanted to get people to turn out to vote for environment at the federal level, but also if things went potentially not in our favor at the federal level, we wanted to make sure that we also had people showing out to vote at the state level and at the local level. And we had some initiatives on our ballot that were targeting specific climate policies that we had worked on and climate funding that we had. And so we really took that as a focus, as an opportunity to call people to target voters who maybe are infrequent voters, but if given the information, we thought would vote in favor of the environment. And what we were able to do is we were also able to build connection with a lot of folks. We were able to reach out and talk to people and learn more about what issues they really care about and bring them into the movement. And now that that campaign is over, and that campaign was very successful, we met our call goal and we had good results in the election at the state level. But even though that campaign is over, a lot of the volunteers that we brought into that campaign that helped us do phone banking, that helped us do canvassing, that helped us do social media work, and callers that we called and we talked to about what issues they cared about showed up to our lobby day and have continued to volunteer with us in some capacity and got involved in the movement. And so campaigns, whether you are a volunteer on a campaign or you are someone who's learning about a campaign, can bring people into the movement, can provide education, can provide a starting point, and can really ground people and like, okay, we can't do everything all at once, but we can focus on this one particular issue right now. And then once we get over that, build off of it and continue to build. And now we're looking forward to, okay, we had success in this campaign. How can we keep that energy going? And now we're focusing on campaigns around legislative priority, which is different from what we were doing in election season, but is building off the energy that was built in that campaign to begin with.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think that, you know, to your point of maybe some of the bigger elections didn't necessarily go in the direction that we were looking for, turning to state and local elections is really critically important, is now more than ever. because we can't sit and wait around for the federal level to take care of the things that we want. We can still lean on these smaller levels or lower levels of government that aren't on the national level to move forward on the things that we want. And the other thing is that we have a lot of young people here who are under voting age. And I think your point about, continuous engagement, whether there were volunteers or people that you talk to, there's still engagement lasting from that, from probably people who are under voting age, who want to be able to enact change and take action, who can do pretty much anything but vote at that point. And that is kind of a conversation in and of its own right, but I think that it does kind of lead us into this next question: how can young advocates take steps to move forward from a shared vision to collective action? How do we take our ideas, put a plan in place, and move toward that action? That's something that you can do regardless of how old you are. So, could you just share a little bit of advice on what some of those first steps might look like?
Yeah, absolutely. And I will say too, to the point of the voting age, that was just a recent example for me. We had a lot of young people participate in Call for Climate action campaign that were not of voting age, but they could still talk to people about why it was important to them that their family or friends or community who was of voting age voted in that election. And so I think that kind of speaks to this larger concept that I bring up a lot in my work. I also work with a lot of young people before I had my role now. I ran a youth fellowship and I run intern programs for young people as well. And something I always say is that your story is your power. And I think first, taking a second as a young person to just really reflect on what is your story? What is your connection to the land, to the ocean, to the environment, to the issue that you're focusing on? And what change do you want to see? And have those conversations with other young people in the space. And that can help you to take your shared vision and turn it into action to see where's the overlap between your story and other people's stories, your shared vision and their shared vision. And then really also look into, say one of the parts of your shared vision is you really want a engaged community. So that's something there where what does that action look like? Does that look like regular events in your community? Does that look like social media? Something that I've done recently is I'm actually starting a book club, and that came from a shared vision that I had with some of my colleagues of we want a space for people to just be able to come together and talk about issues. And so what's a way to do that? Oh, let's have a book club. That's a way for people to learn about issues and read a little bit more and learn about the work we're doing and also come together and talk to one another without having to do some of these other things that might be a little intimidating, like talking to legislators or canvassing or phone banking or some of these other bigger actions. And so you can really do anything you want to do. The sky's the limit when it comes to community events and actions. And you can have really, really big events and you can have really, really small actions like doing clothing swaps with your friend groups of 2 to 3 people. But just taking those visions and those ideas of what do you want to see in this world, really? What are the goals? And then what are small things that you can do to make that a reality in your everyday life. And I think talking and sharing your stories and building ideas off of people and just really getting involved in your community, getting out in your community, not just planning events, but attending events, whether it's an organizing event or something completely separate, like just a community event that's going on. That is a way to stay engaged and to build collective action and to have ideas and to build power.
Yeah, so for those of you who have joined us for the previous three sessions, a lot of this will sound really familiar because it applies in everything. The idea of having your main focus, your conservation why, like you said, what connects you to the land, to the ocean, and leaning on the people around you is all part of, so like building a platform on social media and having successful community events, and then also turning both of those things into a full on, fully fledged campaign like we're talking about today. So now when it comes to the specifics of your campaign goals, you talked about it beforehand, I think it lends itself really well to this question because when we're really in the thick of it and we're trying to solve really complex problems, whether it's at local, national, or federal levels, even if it's a really small, really niche local issue, it can still become very complex very, very quickly. And everybody on your team is kind of going to have their own opinions and differences in thoughts on how they want to go about sharing or achieving this goal. So when we talk about, having our collective momentum all moving forward without getting stuck in the mud, how can we make sure, as young people who are leading campaigns for the first time, do their best to ensure that their personal motivations and their personal thoughts on these issues align with the broader goals of the campaign? And that also kind of leads us into this secondary question from that is, with everybody having all of these differences in opinion, we still want to make sure everybody is heard. So what does it take to kind of create that sort of safe space while trying to align everybody's goals? Another big
Yeah.
question.
This is a really big question, but I'm so glad that it's something that we're talking about because even people who have been in this space for decades still run into this issue. And I think a part of that is because it is a very complicated issue and it's a very personal issue for a lot of us. And so we get really, caught up in our own story and our own why. My biggest piece of advice, I think, would definitely be, and you're probably going to hear me say this multiple times today, is listen for overlap and provide space to both speak and to listen, to share your story and to listen to the stories of others. I think that diversity and representation and in stories and identity is so, so, so important when we are talking about these issues because everybody has a different experience and a different perspective in engaging in the world. And the places that we live, the geography, whether we live in a rural community or an urban community, our age, our gender, our identity, our race, our expression, and the way that we engage with issues in the world is going to inform our world perspectives and our opinions and our approaches to this work. And 9 times out of 10 in this work, there is no right or wrong way in particular to, I think, approach a lot of these topics that we're talking about. There's just differences in experience. And so, first approaching the conversation at that is like, this is my story, and my story is true to me, and my truth is my truth. Just as the other people in this conversation, their experiences are different than mine. Their truth is their truth. Having space where you can all share that and knowing that just because someone disagrees with you doesn't mean that it's a personal attack on you. Doesn't mean that you're wrong or your idea of how to approach something is wrong or that their idea is wrong. It just means that they have a different experience with you than you on the issue. And this is really, really common as communities don't experience environmental issues the same way. There are a lot of ways that communities experience environmental issues differently, and that's going to inform the solutions and the things that we think are most important. And so this is going to be something that, because of that, you run into all the time when you're discussing environmental issues, all the time. And it's something that you have to remember and also reflect a little bit on uh, are you maybe in a privileged position where you're not experiencing environmental injustices or environmental issues the same way as other communities? Like maybe you're discussing an issue with somebody who they live really close to a lot of industries that are causing a lot of air pollution and you don't. And so keeping that in mind as well. But I think creating the safe space where you understand that everyone's truth is their truth, providing time for everybody to share their story, not talking over other people, but listening to people's perspective, listening to why people think the way they do, why people came to the conclusion that they came to, and the solution that they came to, and listen for overlap in people's stories and see where there's shared truths, where there's shared experiences, and use that to inform, okay, it seems like a lot of us all experience, this specifically, or we all think this way, and use that overlap and those shared truths to build your collective why and your collective solution making. And you can also prioritize too, like maybe you don't all have overlap, but there's 10 people in the group and 7 of them are thinking one particular way. So, making sure to kind of see collectively where the goals lie and where the truth is. Um, and using that to inform and know that like discussion and disagreement is an important part of this work. It helps you get closer to the correct solution. And it's going to be complicated. I know that was kind of a still a broad answer, but hopefully it starts to open the conversation of what to do in the
No,
situation.
absolutely. I think it absolutely does. And I think, excuse me, I think it also really relates to the icebreaker question that we kind of asked to have people share about earlier. Like, you know, making sure everybody's voices are heard in order to have that community that we're talking about and have people be engaging with you, you have to engage with them. And in order to do that, that's where you have to find that overlap like you're talking about, and making sure that you're understanding that, you know, one piece of advice that I always give to young people who are frustrated in the environmental world, rightfully so, is that every single person you meet, regardless of their political affiliation, regardless of, you know, their demographic or background, whatever, every single person that you meet knows something about something that you do not know. You have something to learn from every single person that you meet. And if you go into these conversations with like even just a little bit of curiosity, like you were saying, like why they came to their conclusion, you're going to find that it's a lot easier to align the collective goals like we're talking about. So, speaking of community, and this also has a lot to do with what you were talking about before, you know, listening and having these conversations. We as environmentalists, we know inherently that, you know, what is good for the environment typically is pretty good for the people. But as you mentioned, you know, not everybody experiences environmental crises in the same way. Sometimes things are impacting people very differently. Sometimes it impacts different types of people in the same way. There's no way of really knowing that unless you're engaging one-on-one with the people that you're trying to, you know, help with your campaign. So when we're talking about aligning the goals within the team specifically, we also need to make sure that we're aligning the goals within and fulfilling the needs of the communities we aim to serve. So how can young people kind of go about doing that? And then also, what are some of the ways that they can actually identify those specific people, like schools, community groups, other local leaders that can serve as potential allies within that conversation to make sure that they're serving the needs of their community?
Yeah. Um, I think I'm trying to figure out where the best place to start is. I think when it comes to being a leader in this space, being a leader does not mean that you are being authoritarian in how to go about things. Being a leader does not mean that you're going to communities and you're saying, this is the problem and this is what we're doing. I think that being a leader in the broader environmental space is helping people have the resources and feel empowered enough to talk about their stories and make connections between their stories and broader environmental issues and political issues that are going on, and feel that they are supported enough to take action on that. Because the last thing you want to do is to go into a community and lecture the community about the problems that they're facing, you know? And like we said before, they might have different experiences or different perspectives on it than you do, and it's important to listen. It's sometimes more important to listen as a leader than it is to talk, and that's part of leadership in this role. When it comes to identifying and engaging with potential allies, I think something that's really important to remember is that your communities are already organized. There are so many things that are going on in your communities. You just have to know where to look for it. There are events that are going on. There are, like we said, community groups and schools and clubs that, even if it's small communities, this is an example that I use a lot because it's kind of more of an unstructured community, but a community nonetheless. But my sister is a musician and she performs at a lot of open mics around the town that we live in. And when we started going to the open mics, it felt just kind of like, okay, we'll go to this one and then we'll go to this one. And there's people here and there's people here. And the more that you go to these open mics, the more that you find out that there's also a lot of musicians that are going to these same events, around the town, and the same people that come to watch. And through that, we've built a really large community of people and having conversations with them and just getting to know them as people and then learning kind of what their experiences are and what their goals are helps you to identify who are the leaders in that group. The music is just one example because that's not a structured, like, this is a club where we meet once a week and we do this. It's just shared people in a shared town who have a shared interest that happen to be doing the same thing. So I really think reflect inwards on your interests and your routines that you have and the routines of other people. Another community that I love to give an example of, just because like it sounds like a joke, but I am so serious. I learned so many organizing skills by running a One Direction fan account on the internet when I was a teenager and connecting with people all over the world who shared a love of One Direction and coming together and talking in that way and building that online community. Um, that is something that still exists today, and you still see that in music fandoms all over the internet. So I think be creative and thinking about the communities that you are a part of and know that any community is power. It doesn't just have to be an environmental community. And I think that that's where people get stuck is they're like, there's nothing happening in my community because they're looking at it through the lens and the box of where are people organizing for ocean conservation or where are people organizing for environmental conservation. But if you can just find spaces where people are already organized, just period, in any capacity, and just show up and talk to them and get to know them as people and know that you have to play the long game. You're not going to be able to overnight build a campaign, build a community, build action on an issue. You have to get to know people as people. You have to get to know their stories. And that's when you can really start to identify, oh, okay, this person has a lot of similar perspectives to me, and they're already organizing in this other capacity, or they're a leader in this other capacity, or they have a lot of friends and supporters that can help out and invite them into the other spaces that you want them to be in after you've built trust. I think building trust in community and building trust with people is the biggest foundation of larger organizing, and that takes time and you have to have patience with it.
Yeah, Grace. I mean, you really hit on so many important points there. One being that your points on leadership, asking what your community needs of you. We talked about that last week in session 3 about event planning and fundraising because, you need to make sure that you are listening with open ears. That comes with being a leader. I was also I love the One Direction example because I was a Tumblr kid. I am probably twice as old as some of the people on this call right now. I turned 28 in May. And I don't know how many of y'all are still on or are on Tumblr at all, but I was on Tumblr in the peak of 2016, maybe 2012 to 2016. And that community, I still have friends, like some of my best friends in the whole world I made on the internet. And, I think that is kind of its own conversation in terms of like what we grow up with when we have a cell phone in our hand from the age of like 10. It's even younger nowadays, but like we know inherently how to foster that community online. And I think it's interesting now to think about it in like with the younger of the Gen Z group and now Gen Alpha coming up as well, how to actually we had to learn how to shift making community online from in person. Now we have to go the other way and shift from making community online to in person. And I think that I see so many young people making accounts for environmental issues, and it makes me so happy. And it's so cool because that is an opportunity to turn that into real life action. Um, and I think now, kind of moving ahead to this next question, it's interesting to have the internet and like all of the amazing things that it can provide for us in terms of community and engagement and outreach, be kind of a part of this conversation, because intergenerational collaboration is not necessarily something that we see a lot of on the internet in particular. Um, and I do think that that is kind of a missed opportunity in a lot of ways. I understand and am definitely supportive of groups that are by youth for youth specifically. They do not want to have intergenerational collaboration, but it is extraordinarily important still, in the grand scheme of things. Individual groups, that's another thing, but in terms of the broad movement to create change for the planet, working with older folks and people of different age groups is extremely important. And I'm just wondering if you can talk a little bit about, why that is, and then how we can go about fostering that intergenerational collaboration. Also, hi, Kitty.
Yes, this is Pebbles. I have three cats, but Pebbles likes to spend the most time in meetings with me. So she is a Washington Conservation Action employee. We just call her that because she's in every meeting with me. Um, but yeah, I think that this is really important. I am a big advocate for intergenerational organizing, and there's a lot that I can say on this. So I'm gonna try and keep it conducive. But I think that sometimes there can be a lack of trust from both older generations to young people and young people to older generations. And I understand, like, coming from a young person who I'm not necessarily a youth anymore, but when I was doing this organizing work when I was 14 and 15, didn't feel like I was necessarily taken super seriously by adults in the movement because of my age. Like, I understand the lack of trust in engage or the fear in engaging with older generations, and vice versa. I think that it's so important because there is so much historical knowledge in the environmental movement that needs to be passed down. And not just the environmental movement, but just social justice organizing at large. And what I have come to see is I feel that I see newer generations coming in and reinventing the same wheel over and over again because they are not talking to older people in the movement who have been in the movement for a while. The perspective is different. The draw to why a young person today would want to engage in this work is oftentimes different than the perspective of an older person engaging in this work. And I run into this a lot in my role now where I engage people of all ages, and I will have retired people, elderly people come into this work and be like, oh, well, I want my grandkids to have a safe environment. And then I have young people coming into this work saying, well, I want myself to have, a healthy future. There's obviously a big difference there. But I think, again, finding the commonalities and understanding that there's so much knowledge and history on just how to have an effective campaign. What is effective community organizing versus what maybe isn't effective community organizing? What are mistakes that past generations have made in justice organizing? What are things that went really well that past generations did? We can learn so much from studying historical social movements, and we should be doing that, and we should be welcoming that knowledge being passed down generations to generations, understanding that the environmental fight is not new. The environmental justice fight is not new. This type of work, this organizing for a better future, no matter what it is, no matter what topic it is, has been around since the beginning of time. And so building off of that is how we work towards the common goal that our organizing ancestors have had. And that is why it's so important. And I think in order to do that, to bridge generational gaps in organizing, we need to trust each other a little bit more. We need to have older generations who have been organizing for a while welcome new ideas and new perspectives that young people are bringing to the work and understand that it is going to be different. And I think that sometimes there is, fear over like phone banking, for example. I think there's a discussion to be had on how effective phone banking is now because people don't answer their phones. um, but that's something that has been done for ages in political organizing movements. And so it's something that, older generations might want to hold on to, where younger generations might want to get rid of it. And I think it's important to, again, have those conversations about why we do the things we do and listen to older people in the movement who and understand why they think the way they do. And then also listen to young people and understand why they think the way that they do and trust each other that we all have the same goal. Whether the means to the goal might be different or the why we got into this work, we all have the same goal. And knowing that we can all learn from each other. I think that older people can learn from young people just as much as young people can learn from older people. And I think it's really important for all of us to drop the ego a little bit and come in with just a goal of learning and getting to know one another and understanding that we all have things to share and to teach one another and we all have things to learn from one another. Just as you were saying earlier, um, everybody knows something that you don't know. It's the same in intergenerational organizing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think your initial point of like the perpetual reinvention of the wheel is very true. I see that a lot. And we could save a lot of time and energy if we had these like more trusting back and forth conversations between generations. Because like I think phone banking is a really, really good example of that. I think um email newsletters to a certain extent have gone out of fashion in a big way, but they're actually now starting to come back because we're not liking social media as much at this point in time for different reasons, and it's all about, adaptability like you said, and having an open mind to try new things and learn from different people. And I think that there's a lot of ways to collaborate, like you were saying earlier, with like learning about the people who are already working on this stuff in your community. I'll use my own grandma as an example. She lives in Florida. I have a really cool grandma. I'm very lucky. And she is the president of her garden club. And she talks a lot about how important it is that her grandkids and her grandkids' have a healthy planet to live on. And she has a lot of friends. She's 83 and still kicking, and she has a lot of peers who don't understand why they're like, "Oh, well, I'm going to be dead by then. That doesn't matter to me." And she is taking the time and energy out of her day to sit them down and talk to them and say, "Hey, you have grandchildren. You even have great grandchildren. This is why this is so important." And I think there is a certain how do I say this delicately? I think that the older generations have their own type of superiority complex for their own valid reasons compared to the younger generations, and vice versa. Having access to the internet and all of that at a very young age, you have access to educational resources much earlier. Um, and, you know, like all you said, that back and forth is just so important, and there's so many opportunities to strengthen that. So I would really encourage everybody who's on this call right now to kind of think about what that might look like in your community, and figure out where there are some ways where you can maybe connect with different folks. Like you said earlier, if there's um people who are organized at all over anything, you can still go to them and figure out a way to talk to them. And older folks are just another one of those groups. Okay, so now we're talking a lot about stuff in kind of a broad sense. But I do want to get into a little bit of the more policy specific based advocacy. Um, we have talked a little bit about it, but in terms of, talking to people, individuals, voters, that is related to this as well. But the actual policy makers, that's kind of its own branch of advocacy. You can go through community grassroots, you can go through policy. There's a lot of other ways, but talking about this specifically, being able to connect your grassroots campaign, no matter the issue and no matter what other avenues you're taking, being able to attach your campaign to specific policy, or at least um, integrate some form of legislation based on the issue you're trying to change, is very, very, very important and helpful in terms of leading to a systemic change over time. This is a delicate conversation, particularly in the United States right now on the federal level, but also remember that there's a lot of local and state level policy that you can still help to influence. So, how can young people actually go about doing that connection work and making sure that their grassroots campaigns are connected to such policy legislative efforts?
Yeah. Uh, I honestly think that engaging in policy and legislative advocacy work at a local and state level is one of the more impactful things that we can do in the United States, because that's where we can pass the more progressive policies. And a lot of times, the environmental policies that we see at the federal level made it to the federal level because they started at a county level or they started at a city level and made their way up. And when you're working in policy, you'll hear a lot of times when you're introducing even a state policy, well, there are other states who have done this program and hasn't been successful. So very rarely are you going to be able to walk into the federal government in the United States and say, hey, this is what I want to see happen, and have it move through if it has not been a policy at a state or a local level. And so because of that, I think as progressive environmentalists, working at not even the state level, at the local level, at the city council level, is a really, really impactful way to make change. There are lots of ways to do that. Town halls are a really, really great way to speak to your legislators and introduce new ideas to them and hear their goals. Those are going on all throughout the year. In Washington State, there's a lot going on right now in the legislative session that we're, tracking and sending out to folks. So getting involved in town halls and meeting your legislators where they're at. I recently did, this was really fun. This was a new type of organizing campaign for me, but I'm really, really into letter writing campaigns. I think that that's a really easy way for folks to write to their legislators. And I recently tabled 2 nights at a Billie Eilish concert, and I made postcards that said climate action now and had people come visit me at the table and write why they think the governor of Washington State should prioritize environment in his work, because we were getting a new governor. And we were able to get over close to 200 people write letters to the governor that we were then able to deliver to his office. And doing that type of grassroots people power, showing up to your legislators' offices, setting up meetings with them, petitions, and encouraging people. Another thing that I think is really valuable is encouraging people to sign in pro on bills or sign in con on bills if it's a negative bill. But getting involved with local organizations in your state or your county that are tracking bills and are working on bill priorities. And when those bills are going to committees for a hearing, and so I'm working on a bunch that we really want to pass. So when they went to their bill committees for a hearing, we encouraged people to go and sign in pro, and had a flood of, hundreds of people signing in pro for this bill to show legislators just how many people in communities care about this legislation. That I think is a really powerful tool to be able to do. And I think also people underestimate the ability to just set up a meeting with your legislator and talk through ideas. Every single bill that goes through the legislature whether again it's at city council or a state or even the federal level, starts with just a discussion about an idea. And you can set up a meeting with your legislator at any time, and it doesn't have to be a lobby meeting. When I was in college, I had the opportunity to write my own bill and run it through the Oregon legislature. It unfortunately died, but it was a really great experience, and that came from me talking to my legislator and discussing an idea and him introducing my bill out of his house and or out of his office. And that is a great way to get involved, and I've seen people do that before in both Washington State and Oregon. Um, Writing bills from a community perspective, reaching out to a nonprofit with an idea, and finding a legislator or two that's willing to introduce it or sponsor it as it moves through the legislative session, and really bringing those communities' idea and the collective idea that we talked about to the forefront. But also, I think just people power and empowering people to share their stories with legislators and really focusing on, numbers. How can you show legislators just how many community members care about these issues? Even doing something like hosting a rally on the Capitol steps in your state Capitol building is something that we've done often. I just did one a couple weeks ago. Bringing people in person, showing faces, showing how many people care about issues is a really, really valuable skill to do.
Yeah, really making your voice heard. That's kind of the crux of the thing, right? Like showing up, being there, getting people to participate in these legislative processes, doing, in-person rallies on the steps of the Capitol building is a great way to do that. Doing letter writing campaigns is a great way to do that. I also think that especially during COVID, like the peak of COVID, people were, small municipal offices were holding city council meetings online, which is still something that is happening. A lot of city council meetings have moved back to in person, but there's still a lot online. Um, and I'm saying that because I think that you should go. I think that it's a great idea to show up, show the people that are, making these decisions in your immediate community, let them know what you think. Like that is really the whole point of participating in these processes. And that's something that you can do as a young person who's not of voting age. I remember going to city council meetings when I was in middle school, when I was a Girl Scout. We went, you know, a couple of times, and it was a really clearly informative, yes, formative experience for me. And I would really encourage all of you to, consider doing that as well. And if you're not in the States, whatever kind of equal experience that is, if your policy and legislative, oh my goodness, I'm sorry, legislative process does not necessarily work the same in your community, there are still often ways that you can get in-person meetings with the people who are making those decisions. So to wrap up this slide, do you have any advice for young people who want to engage in those face-to-face decision making processes?
Yeah, I think the biggest piece of advice, and it feels redundant because I've said it multiple times on this call today, is just your story is your power. And you don't have to be an expert on climate science or ocean science or the legislative policy that's going through. You just have to know that you care about an issue and this is why and this is how it's impacting you, and tell your story, and know that elected officials are people that you are capable of building professional relationships with, and showing up to city council meetings time and time and time again and getting to know these legislators on a personal level. There are a couple of, representatives and elected officials in the Washington state legislature that I am on a first name basis with or know on a more personal level because I am talking to them and lobbying to them and going to their office year after year, time after time, that they get to know me a little bit better. And that is how you really start to build power, is just make yourself known, repeatedly show up and share your story and speak from the heart. And don't be afraid to reach out. Don't be afraid to cold email. Don't be afraid to, put together a group and show up and lobby. And you don't have to go to like a giant lobby day. You can set up a meeting with your legislator, write a letter to your legislator at literally any time about anything. You can request a meeting with them. And so do that. Take advantage of it and don't be afraid to be annoying.
I cannot overstate how you literally took the words out of my mouth. That is exactly what I was going to say, is
Cool.
do not be afraid to be annoying. Because, like, that's their job. They were put into this position, they were elected to represent a group of people. If they are not representing you, you are well within your right to annoy the heck out of them and really make yourself known. That's very funny. That's a good way to, like, I think, wrap up this slide. Don't be afraid to be a pain in the butt of your elected officials because that is what they signed up for. So you are well within your right to do it. Now, let's see here. We do have a lot of context here, but we only have like 10 minutes left, and I want to make sure we have time for the Q&A. So if, as we're going through this last slide, if you do have any questions, feel free to, share it in the chat, use the Q&A feature, and I'm going to focus on one specific question here, Grace, for you. What is one key lesson? I think I may know the answer. What is one key lesson from your experience that could help young organizers build more effective and sustainable campaigns? And how can we balance doing this advocacy work as young people who have completely other, like, completely irrelevant, not necessarily, but other things going on in our lives that also take up a lot of our time and energy? How do we maintain that balance while still being effective organizing leaders?
Yeah. I think this is a great question to end on, and I'm going to try and keep it relatively short and sweet, so we can get to Q&A questions as well. But I think I have a lot of experience with taking on way too much and getting really burnt out and then not being able to do the work. And you can't do the work if you're burnt out, and you have to sustain this. And I think for me, I'm not going to be able to solve climate change or the climate crisis in my lifetime. That is my end goal of this work. I'm not going to be able to do it on my own, and I'm probably going to be working towards it through my whole career as the people before me have done. And that can be a hard reality to swallow, but I also think it's an empowering one to understand that to truly make effective, impactful campaigns, you have to view them as long term, and you have to view them as the trust building, the community power, the storytelling empowerment, all these things that we've talked about. It takes years to do. It takes time. And a mistake that I see people do, and I'm seeing people do it right now in the US with everything that's going on in the federal government, is people get really, really angry and they want to take action, and they jump right into things and they do a million things, and they're consuming all this news all the time, and they're doing all this work all the time, and then they get burnt out and they do this work for like a couple months and that's it. And you have to balance it. And it's okay. You don't have to solve everything. You don't have to do everything all at once. So it's okay to take a day off from this work. It's okay to not reshare every single infographic that you see on your Instagram story, or to read every single news headline that you see. It's okay to not be informed on every little thing that's happening on this issue at every possible moment, and understand that going out and getting involved in community in a fun way, and not necessarily always being in an organizer mentality, but like just going to a community event because it's fun. That is still a form of resistance, and that is still part of doing this work. It's actually a very important part of doing this work. And so allow yourself to do that, allow yourself to have fun, and allow yourself to take breaks, and understand that you're not going to solve the goals that you have overnight. You might not even solve it in your career, in your lifetime, and that is okay. You have to sustain yourself, or else you're not going to do the work at all.
Yeah, I think that is like the perfect thing to end on because as somebody who compulsively presses the add to story button on my personal Instagram, I am definitely guilty of, like, sharing probably what would be considered too much. I don't think it's too much most of the time. A lot of people tend to, but you know, that's completely up to you as your own person and whatever you choose to do as your niche form of resistance and your form of action is perfect for you. And whatever anybody else has to say about it doesn't matter, because if you know that you are doing everything that you can within your capacity and availability to do so, that's all that really matters. And you can't do that if you are taking on more than what you can. Excuse me. So, now moving on to our Q&A from Carolina. In your experience, what personal qualities are most important for a youth leader in the environmental advocacy space? That's an interesting question.
That is an interesting question. Um, I think something that has been really helpful for me in the space, or just like a quality of mine, is um making friends. Like, it sounds kind of cheesy, but making and maintaining friendships. I would not be here speaking to you all today if Laura and I hadn't maintained a friendship over the years, like via social media and, meeting up once every 5 years and staying connected via text. And there are so many people that I truly can call my friends all over, not just the country, but the world, that I met and I organized with for like 6 months or a year, and I stayed connected with, that has really, really helped me in the movement, especially as a young person. It will help you so much in your careers. Like, stay connected to people, even if it's just on social media and you're supporting your work, but like, get people's phone numbers, get people on social media, make friends with people, stay connected to those friends, because as you get older and you get into careers and you're working at organizations, like, you're going to be coming into your organizing job being like, I know a person at this org, I know a person at this org, I know a person at this org. That's where I am in my job now. And it's really elevated me in my career to be like, I have connections to all these different organizations because I made friends with them when I was a youth organizer when I was 15, and we were all just, volunteers in the same space, and now we're professionals in the field. So, I mean, don't underestimate the power of community and just staying connected and making friends with the people that you meet.
Yeah, the power of friendship.
Friendship will save the world.
And I want to add that I think that um having a sense of humor as a personal quality in this space in particular, what we are up against, the literal apocalypse, end of the world stuff, is how it feels a lot of the time. And, there are places that are more or less appropriate to make jokes and make light of certain situations, but I think that, like, remembering to laugh and, like, having a sense of humor and, like, joking with your friends and, like, with your peers, like, it can really break the ice. It can really settle things down and make people feel more comfortable. And I think it's something that's kind of a lost art in this space. Everybody's always so serious. Everybody's so like, we need to focus on this thing right now. We're having this conversation and nobody wants to, like, take a moment to breathe. And I think that's kind of like something that I would encourage all of you to try to, it don't force a sense of humor. Don't go try to learn how to be like a stand-up comedian unless you want to. But, just being able to, like, break people's walls down a little bit, I think is very helpful in this space as well. Let's see in the chat. Someone else said, yeah, well, Abigail said, my mom always says that if you don't laugh, you cry. Be optimistic and make light of the hard times. That's literally something that Grace and I were joking about before the webinar started. So, yes. But somebody else in the chat said, what would you recommend to do if you are someone who is trying to unite several experts on a specific topic of research but don't know how to start? That's also a good question.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I would definitely recommend just starting conversations with people one-on-one. Like, you don't have to bring everybody into a space all together right at the beginning, but just float the idea around. Again, remember, like, it's going to take a while. That's okay. That's part of building it up to be really impactful and really intentional. But reaching out to people and saying, hey, this is a goal that I have. This is an idea that I kind of want to like build a community around this. And what are your thoughts about it? And it's gonna be a lot of work at first because you're gonna be maintaining different conversation threads with different people, but building that relationship and then being like, okay, I think I want to have, a meeting with all of you now that I know people are interested, and then just having a meeting where people just kind of get to know each other first. Like, you don't have to jump right into the work, but definitely providing space for people to get to know each other, or like maybe introducing people a little bit at a time. So you're having a conversation with one person, and then another person is like, yeah, I'm interested. And you're like, okay, cool, I'll connect you to, and then they can kind of have their own conversation. And um, let people build up their community naturally. Don't force it, but start these conversations one on one and then just build it wherever the momentum or wherever the energy goes. And definitely like have an introductory meeting with everyone once you get to know them a little bit better too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think those are great questions. If anybody else does have any questions, feel free to email me. But I do want to move on. This last little bit here, we have a couple of announcements. I know we're a couple minutes over the top of the hour, so just bear with me here. I do want to ask a little call to action for all of you watching right now. For those of you who may not be familiar with the High Seas Treaty, um, we are trying to protect over like 50 to 60% of the surface of the earth here. And it's really important for a lot of reasons that I'm sure many of you are kind of familiar with, at least a little bit. And what I would really encourage you all to do is to contact your local and national leaders and ask them, if they have not yet already done so, to ratify the High Seas Treaty. There is a list of key countries who have not yet ratified. If you check and your country has already ratified, I would encourage you to reach out to your national leaders and say thank you, and to please continue to do such important work to protect our ocean and climate. But if you are interested in looking for the list of key national leaders to reach out to, go to worldoceanday.org/February 2025. That was last month's monthly action for the 12 months of action for World Ocean Day. February was the High Seas Treaty Month. So there's a bunch of resources listed up there. It's really, really important that we make our voices heard. So definitely check that out. Please feel free to email me if you have any questions about this as well. Now, to just run through the certificate of completion. Um, for those of you who have participated in advocacy training before, you know that we do a certificate of completion at the end of the program. Technically, yes, this is session 4. However, I would really recommend that you register for session 5 next week. It is a separate registration link from the original 4 cycle or sessions. And it is for youth specifically affiliated with a zoo, aquarium, or museum, whether you interned, volunteered, took part in some sort of program within one of those types of institutions. It's about taking everything that we've learned throughout the first 4 sessions and then working within the boundaries of one of those institutions to create change. As zoos, aquariums, and museums are often very trusted institutions within the communities that they are, and you can do a lot of change and a lot of good working with them. So I highly recommend that. We will not be sending out the link to the feedback survey that you have to complete until after next week's session. So you may as well just register for session 5. I am a little bit biased when I say that, but you will have until the end of March to complete that. And then it'll take us a couple of weeks to get the certificates out once those surveys are submitted. But just so you know, that is coming down the pipeline. You will get an email at the end of the cycle after next Saturday with the link to the feedback survey to complete for the certificate. But if you have any questions in the meantime, again, feel free to email me. All of the recordings are available on the channel again next Saturday. And then, of course, we have our World Ocean Day resources that will be going up on the website very, very soon. You will also be getting an email about our event planning toolkit very, very soon. So keep an eye out for that. Um, excuse me. What a way to end the regular training cycle. Grace, thank you so much for joining us on a Saturday, taking time out of your weekend to have this conversation. It was great chatting with you as always. And for those of you watching right now who are not going to be with us on Saturday, thank you so much for joining us for this training cycle. It is a privilege to be able to talk to you on such a regular basis about these things that mean very much to me on a personal level, and I'm sure, of course, to all of you as well. So thank you so much for joining us. I do hope I get to see you next week. If you're looking for that registration link, it is in the description of the Zoom registration link for this session. I believe it is also in the Instagram bio on the World Ocean Day account. So again, Grace, thank you so much. And thank you to everybody else for joining us. And I hope that you all have a wonderful rest of your weekend.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. I put my contact information in the chat. Feel free to stay in touch with me, but it was so great to be here and to chat with you. Laura, thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, well, everybody have a great rest of your weekend. See you later. Bye. Thank you.
Bye.